The packmaster's mirth came across the open channel before the dust on the human craft had even settled, and every hunter in the Skull Reach heard him laugh. "Look at it," Vornak said. His voice filled the bridge of the lead cutter tooth of the long dark, warm and slow, the way it always was when prey did something foolish. It came alone. It came in that. On the forward screen, the human fighter hung against the green glow of the gas giant Merrick, small and battered and slow. It was a single-seat craft barely 40 meters long, a stub-winged thing with a blunt nose and a hull the color of old iron. 3 of its 8 thruster ports were dark. One wing carried a long scorch mark that ran from root to tip. A panel near the cockpit had been replaced and never repainted, so it sat against the rest of the hull like a bruise. It did not look like a warship. It looked like something that had been thrown away and then dragged back out of the scrap. Vornak's hunters had been raiding the human supply lane through the Skull Reach for 9 days. They had taken 4 freighters and a fuel tender, and they had expected, when Earth finally answered, a proper fleet. A wall of cruisers, something worth the hunt. Instead, on the 6th day of waiting, this had come drifting out of the deep, one tired little fighter, with a pilot who would not even give his name. The pack laughed with him. They were good at laughing. 200 years of hunting the lanes between the stars had taught the Skull Reach that fear was a weapon you used on the prey, never a thing you felt yourself, and a creature that does not feel fear learns to laugh easily, because laughter is what comes out of the place where fear is supposed to live. On 40 cutters and corvettes scattered in a loose ring around the human craft, hunters who had killed colony ships and run down freighters and emptied fuel tenders for sport laughed at the little iron fighter and waited for the packmaster to give the word. "Human craft," Vornak said into the channel, still smiling with all his teeth. "You are surrounded by 41 ships of the Skull Reach. We have killed larger things than you for sport. Surrender the lane, and we will let you run home. Refuse, and we will mount your hull on the tooth as a trophy. You have my word as packmaster, which is more mercy than your kind has ever been shown out here." There was a pause. The human's reply, when it came, was a man's voice, dry and unhurried, the voice of someone who had said the same kind of thing many times before and had grown tired of saying it. "You've been hunting that lane 9 days, the pilot said. I've been hunting you for 6. Vornak laughed again, but a few of his hunters did not. On the cutter Greyfang, the sensor officer Resh leaned closer to her console. She had been counting. For 6 days, ever since the human craft had first appeared on the long-range scopes, 3 of the pack's outrider ships had gone silent. Not destroyed in battle, not screaming on the wide channels, just gone. One had stopped answering during a fuel transfer. One had drifted off course, and then off the scope entirely. One had simply not been there at the next muster. Each time, the packmaster had blamed bad engines, bad pilots, the deep cold of the Reach. Each time, Resh had logged the loss and said nothing, because saying something was how a hunter ended up at the back of the line, and the back of the line was where hunters who asked too many questions tended to disappear. She looked at the little iron fighter on the screen, and for the first time in her life, she felt the cold of the Reach, the way prey must feel it. The cold that lives in the moment a thing realizes it is being watched by something patient. "It is one ship," Vornak said, as if he had heard her thinking. "Resh, tell me what it carries. Put the prey's measure on the screen so the pack can see how little there is to fear." She ran the scan. The fighter was old, that was true. Its reactor signature was low. Its hull was scarred and patched. But the numbers underneath were wrong, in a way she did not have words for. The mass came back at 1,900 tons, 4 times what a craft that size should weigh. A 40-meter fighter weighed 500 tons at the most. This thing weighed as much as a Corvette, and the weight sat inside a hull that should not have been able to hold a quarter of it. The armor returned a density her instruments could not name. They simply showed the value climbing and then giving up, the readout running off the end of its own scale and sitting there blinking, refusing to commit to a number. And the weapon emplacements, 6 of them, sat cold and silent and gave back nothing at all. Not low readings, nothing. As if they were not weapons but holes cut into the world. Places where her sensors looked and found that there was nothing there for sensors to find. "Packmaster," she said carefully, choosing each word the way you choose footing on cracking ice. "Its mass is wrong. It is too heavy by 4 times. Its armor reads past the end of my scale, and I cannot read its guns. Not weak readings, no readings. The instruments look and come back empty. Then it has no guns worth reading, Vornak said. A junk fighter with a heavy engine and a patched hull. Gray Fang, Iron Maw, Cutter 11. Bring it in, gently. I want it whole. I want the trophy to look good on the tooth, and a trophy with holes in it is just scrap. 3 of the pack's ships peeled away from the loose ring and slid toward the human fighter. Weapons live. Claws of light reaching out to grapple and hold. They were good ships, crewed by good hunters. The Skull Reach had been hunting the lanes between the stars for 200 years, and they were very good at the part of the hunt where the prey was already cornered. They had done it 1,000 times. They knew exactly how it went. The prey ran. The prey was caught. The prey was brought in. There was a rhythm to it, comfortable as breathing. The human craft did not run. That was the first thing that was wrong. Prey ran. Even brave prey ran. At the end, when the claws came out, the little iron fighter simply turned its blunt nose toward the 3 approaching ships and held still, the way a thing holds still when it has decided it is not the one being hunted. Last warning, the pilot said, and now there was something underneath the dryness, something patient and very old, the way a deep current runs under flat water. Power down and pull back. I'm not here for 41 ships. I'm here for the one flying the tooth. The rest of you can still go home tonight. Think about your cruise before your pride does your thinking for you. Vornak's smile finally slipped, just at the edges. No prey spoke like that. No prey gave warnings. Mount it, he ordered. The 3 ships fired their grapple beams together, and the little iron fighter was not where the beams went. It moved. Resh would spend the rest of her short career trying to describe how it moved, and she would never manage it, because 40-meter fighters did not do what it did. It did not turn and accelerate. It was in one place, and then it was in another, 11,000 kilometers away, with no streak of light between, no flare of a drive, nothing for the eye or the scope to follow. One instant it filled the targeting screens of 3 ships, and the next instant the screens were empty and the grapple beams closed on the place where it had been. 3 claws of light wrapped around nothing, looking suddenly very foolish in the green glow of the giant. Where? Vornak said. It was not a question. It was the sound a predator makes when, for the first time in 200 years, it cannot find the thing it was hunting. The sound of a hunter, discovering that the dark has more in it than he put there. Behind us, Resh whispered. The Gray Fang's rear sensors lit. The little iron fighter was hanging off the cutter's stern, 40 meters of patched and scorched hull, so close she could have counted the rivets along its flank. Its cold weapons were no longer cold. Along its sides, 6 long emplacements had opened, and inside each one something turned and pointed, slow and deliberate, the way a hand closes around a throat that has not yet realized it is being held. Resh's first instinct was to fire. Her hand was already on the firing key before her mind caught up to it, and her mind, when it caught up, stopped her, because she had just watched the human cross 11,000 kilometers between one heartbeat and the next, and she understood that anything the Gray Fang could throw would arrive at a place the fighter had already left. There was no point shooting at it. You could not shoot at a thing that decided, after you pulled the trigger, where it would be. The realization was small and quiet, and it changed everything, because it meant the most basic law of the hunt no longer applied. You could not hurt this. You could only wait to see what it decided to do to you. Across the loose ring, the rest of the pack had gone silent. The laughter was gone. 40 cutters and corvettes hung in the green light of Merrick and watched the place where a junk fighter had been, and the place it had appeared, and 40 crews did the same arithmetic Resh had done, and arrived at the same cold sum. On the wide channel a young hunter on the corvette Splitfang said, into the quiet, "Packmaster, it is faster than our targeting. We cannot lead a shot on it. We cannot lead a shot on anything that moves like that." His voice cracked on the last word. He was very young. He had joined the Reach believing, as they all had, that to fly under the pack's flag was to be the most dangerous thing in any sky. He was learning, in real time, that he had been wrong, and the learning was happening to his face for everyone to hear. "Hold formation," Vornak said. But formation was a thing you held against an enemy who came at you from a direction. The human did not come from a direction. The human came from wherever it chose, and a formation built to face all directions at once is not a formation. It is just a number of frightened ships standing close together, which is exactly what the Skull Reach had become in the last 90 seconds, though most of them did not know it yet. The pilot's voice came one more time, soft now, almost kind, meant for her ears alone before it would be meant for everyone. 6 days, he said. I told you, I've been counting too. You want to know where the 3 Outriders went? They're the same place the rest of you are about to go. The only choice left is how far down the list your name sits, and how loud you are when your turn comes. The first shot from the Iron Fighter did not look like a shot at all. Resh saw the Grey Fang's engineering deck go dark on her board, every light on that section blinking out at once, and only afterward did her instruments catch up and tell her what had happened. A single bolt had crossed the 40 meters between the 2 ships and gone through the cutter's stern armor, through 3 internal bulkheads, through the reactor housing, and out the far side, all in less time than her console could measure. It did not explode. It did not need to. It had simply made a line through everything in its path and turned that line into nothing. There was no fire. There was no blast. There was only a clean round hole through the heart of the ship and an engine that had been running a second ago and was now a cold, dead weight. The Grey Fang did not die. That was, in some ways, worse. The little fighter had not aimed at the crew. It had aimed at the engines, and the engines were gone, and the cutter that had hunted the lanes for 40 years now drifted dead and dark in the green light, helpless, alive, watching. Resh sat at a console that still had power, and stared at a ship that no longer did, and understood, in a cold and total way, that the human had measured the exact line between killing her and crippling her, and had chosen, deliberately, the crueler one. It crippled them, Resh said into the command channel. Packmaster, it did not kill them. It chose. It put the shot through the engines and left the crew alive. It could have killed us with the same bolt, and it decided not to. On the tooth, Vornak stood very still. He was a large hunter, even among his kind, broad across the shoulders, his hide marked with the kill scars of 200 raids. He had ordered ships to their deaths before. He had watched prey beg and run and die. He had never watched one of his own be taken apart by something he could not see coming, and he found that he did not have a word for the feeling in his chest. It was new. He did not like new things. New things, in the dark between the stars, were how hunters died. All ships, he said, forget gentle. Kill it. Kill it now, before it does that again. The order went out, and the Skull Reach did what it did best. 38 ships turned as one and brought their guns to bear, and the green sky around the human fighter filled with light. They were not a clumsy pack. They fired in overlapping patterns, the way a net is woven, so that even if the prey moved it would move into another gun's line. It was a beautiful thing to watch, in its way. It was the work of 2 centuries of hunting, all of it aimed at one 40-meter target, a converging storm of fire that should have left nothing behind but glowing vapor. The fighter moved through it the way water moves through a hand. It did not dodge each shot. There were too many shots to dodge. Instead, it slid between the patterns, finding the seams the hunters did not know their net had, appearing in the gap a half-second before the gap closed, and gone again before it could be filled. Twice a beam clipped its hull, and Resh saw the impact flare, and saw the iron armor take the blow, and saw the fighter not so much as shudder. The thing weighed 1,900 tons, and it was armored like a wall, and it moved like a thrown knife, and the combination should not have been possible. Mass that high did not turn that fast. Armor that thick did not move at all. The numbers fought each other, and they should have torn the ship apart, and the ship did not seem to care that it was impossible. It simply went on being all of those things at once, calmly, as if the laws the rest of the galaxy obeyed were a local custom it had never agreed to. And while it moved, it fired. The Iron Maw lost its weapons. 6 bolts, 6 emplacements gone, each shot placed with a care that was somehow worse than rage, and then the Iron Maw hung there disarmed, a hunter with its claws cut off, alive and blind and useless. Cutter 11 lost its engines, exactly the way the Grey Fang had, and joined the growing field of dark and drifting ships. The cutter's Sharptooth tried to ram, a desperate thing, throwing its whole hull at the little fighter, and the fighter let it come, and then was simply not there, and the Sharptooth tumbled past into open space, and lost its drive to a single bolt as it went, the shot taking it from behind almost as an afterthought, the way a man swats a thing without breaking his stride. "It is not killing us," Resh said again. She could not stop saying it. It was the most frightening fact in the whole battle, more frightening than the speed, more frightening than the armor. "Packmaster, it has had 40 chances to kill us, and it has not taken one. It is taking us apart. It is leaving us alive. Every ship it touches, it leaves the crew breathing. It wants us alive. I do not know why, and that is the part that frightens me most." Vornak understood then what the human had meant. The pilot had said he was not here for 41 ships. He had said he was here for the one flying the tooth. The little iron fighter was not fighting a battle. It was clearing a room, methodically, ship by ship, removing everything between itself and the one ship it wanted, and it was leaving the rest alive because the rest were not the point. The rest were witnesses. The human was building an audience out of the pack, and he was building it on purpose. And there was nothing the pack could do but be built. "Who is he?" Vornak said. "Resh, the channel. Open it. I want to know who I am speaking to." She opened it. For a moment there was only the hiss of the deep. Then the dry voice came back, calm as ever, a little breathless now, the way a man sounds when he is busy with his hands and talking to pass the time. "You can call me Hale," the pilot said. "Wing commander, retired. The ship's called the Old Wolf. She's older than your whole pack, and she's killed more than your whole pack. And the two of us came out of retirement for exactly one reason, so I'd like you to stop wasting my afternoon and hold still. You're not going to win this. You stopped being able to win it about 6 days ago. You just didn't get the message." 41 ships, Vornak said. "One fighter. You cannot believe you will win this. No ship can stand against the whole reach. No ship ever has." "Son," Hale said, and the word carried 200 years of weariness in it. "I've already won it. You just haven't finished losing yet. That's the difference between us. You think this is happening now. To me, it already happened, 6 days ago, when I picked the order I'd take you in. The last 6 days have just been me walking through a thing I already did in my head. Now hold still." The Old Wolf killed the cutter Bonebreaker's engines as he said it, and the Bonebreaker drifted off into the green, and the pack's ring grew thinner by one more dark and silent hull. Resh pulled up the old craft's record, what little of it the pack's databases held, and found almost nothing. There was no entry for a human fighter called the Old Wolf. There was no entry for a wing commander Hale. The Skull Reach had catalogs of every species they had ever hunted, every ship class, every weapon, every flag and call sign and hull profile, 200 years of careful predators' bookkeeping, and the human fighter appeared in none of it. It was not in the archives because it had never let anyone who saw it live long enough to write it down. The 3 outriders that had gone silent over the last 6 days had not had engine trouble. They had met the Old Wolf, one at a time, in the dark, and the Old Wolf had taken them apart and let no signal out, and only now, with the whole pack gathered to watch, had it stopped hiding. That was the part Resh could not stop turning over. The human had spent 6 days hunting them in silence, picking off outriders, learning the pack, never showing itself. It could have run the whole supply lane gauntlet in an hour. It had not. It had taken 6 days because it wanted them gathered. It wanted the audience. It wanted Vornak to see every ship in his pack go dark, one after another, so that when the end came, the packmaster would understand exactly what had come for him, and exactly how long it had been patient. The whole battle was a sentence the human had written days ago, and the pack was only now arriving at the end of it. "He has been hunting us the whole time," Resh said. "We thought we were hunting the lane. We were the lane. We were the prey from the first day. He let us take the freighters because the freighters drew us in. He let us think we were winning because a thing that thinks it is winning stops watching the dark." "Be quiet," Vornak said, but there was no force in it, and Resh noticed that he did not order her to be wrong. He only ordered her to be quiet. There was a difference, and the difference was the first crack in the packmaster she had ever seen. The battle, if it could be called that, went on. The Skull Reach had been 41 ships when the human fighter stopped pretending. 20 minutes later it was 22, and not one of the 19 lost had been destroyed. 19 ships hung dark and crippled in the green glow of Merrick, their crews alive inside, their engines or their guns gone, and the human fighter moved among the rest like a man walking through a field, choosing each stalk before he cut it. It was the choosing that broke the pack's nerve. A hunter understands killing. A hunter has made peace with death, his own and others, because death is the shape of the work. What a hunter cannot bear is to be spared, to be looked at by the thing that could kill you, and to be set aside as not worth the trouble, and to be left alive only so that you will carry the story home. There is no answer to that. There is no courage that survives it. A hunter can die brave. A hunter cannot be told, by the thing that holds his life in its hand, that his life is not even worth the taking. One by one, the captains of the Skull Reach felt the old certainty go out of them. The certainty that they were the dangerous ones, the apex, the teeth in the dark. It was being taken from them not by force but by example, 40 meters of patched iron showing them, ship by ship, exactly how small they had always been. Resh watched a corvette called the Redthorn make a run at the Old Wolf from behind, while the fighter was busy with another ship, a clean ambush, the kind of move the Reach had drilled for 100 years. The Old Wolf did not even turn. It put a bolt through the Redthorn's drive without breaking from the ship it was already working on, the way a man brushes away an insect while reading. And Resh understood that the human was not even paying full attention anymore. It was disabling ships with the part of its mind that was not occupied. The Reach had been the most feared force in this stretch of the dark for 2 centuries, and it had become, in 20 minutes, the thing a tired old man took apart while thinking about something else. On the cutter Nightclaw, a captain named Drask gave the order no Skull captain had given in 200 years. He turned his ship and ran. The Old Wolf let him go. The little fighter watched the Nightclaw flee toward the edge of the system, and it did not pursue, and Hale's voice came over the open channel, dry and clear, meant for every ear in the pack. "That one can leave," he said. "I told you. The rest of you can still go home. I'm only here for the tooth. Anybody who's done hunting my people, point your nose at deep space and burn. I won't stop you. I won't even watch you go. You have my word, and unlike your packmaster's word, mine has never once been broken, because I've never once needed to break it." It was the cruelest thing he could have said, and Resh understood that he knew it. He was giving them their lives back. He was making each captain choose, out loud, in front of the packmaster, whether to stand with Vornak or to run. He was breaking the Skull Reach not with his guns but with the offer of survival, and the offer was worse than any weapon, because every ship that took it was a ship that admitted, to itself and to all the others, that the hunt was over, and they were the ones who had lost. Every fleeing ship was a confession. The human was collecting confessions the way he had collected silence, patiently, for an audience. "Cowards," Vornak said into the channel, but no one answered him, because the cowards were the ones still alive, and the living do not argue with the dying about the worth of being alive. 4 more ships ran, then 6, then 9. They peeled off from the dying ring and burned for the dark, and the Old Wolf let every one of them go, and with each ship that fled, Vornak felt his pack drain out around him like water from a cracked hull. He had brought 41 ships to hunt a supply lane. He watched, now, as the lane hunted them, one quiet bolt and one quiet offer at a time, and he could not stop either one. He shouted orders, and the orders meant nothing, because an order is a thing a pack obeys out of belief, and the belief was gone. He had spent 200 years building that belief, the belief that the Reach was the strongest thing in the dark, and a tired old human in a junk fighter had spent 20 minutes spending it, all of it, down to nothing. "They're not cowards," Hale said. "They're just smarter than you. That's a low bar, but they cleared it. You want to clear it too, Packmaster? There's still time. Turn the tooth around. Go home. Tell your people the lane belongs to Earth now, and never come back, and you'll die old in a warm bed instead of cold out here, and I'll let you. That's the deal. That's the only deal I've got, and it's a better one than you ever gave a single ship you ran down. And if I refuse? Then you're the trophy," Hale said simply. "You said you'd mount my hull on the tooth. I'm going to mount the tooth on the deep, with you still aboard, and I'm going to do it slow enough that everyone who ran today will hear about it and tell their grandchildren. Your call. You've got until I finish with the rest of them. I'd think fast. I'm nearly done." The 11 ships around the tooth were the pack's veterans, the oldest crews and the proudest captains, the ones who had stayed not out of courage, but because they could not imagine the dark holding anything they should fear. Resh watched them learn. The cutter Hollowfang fired a spread of mines into the space around the old wolf. A clever thing. A trap meant to fill the seams the fighter slid through with shrapnel. The old wolf went still for the first time all battle, hung motionless in the cloud of armed mines, and then it fired 6 bolts in a single breath, and each bolt found a mine and turned it to nothing before it could arm. And then a 7th bolt found the Hollowfang's drive, and the trap setter drifted dark like all the rest. The human had answered 2 centuries of cleverness with 3 seconds of work, and had made it look like a courtesy. The Corvette Lash and the Corvette Brand tried the oldest trick in the pack's book, splitting wide to either side, so that whichever way the prey turned, it would show its flank to the other. It was the move that had killed 100 fleeing freighters. The old wolf did not turn either way. It dropped straight down out of the plane the 2 corvettes had built, appeared beneath the Lash, took its engines, rose through the gap between them faster than either could track, and took the Brand's engines from above, and the 2 corvettes that had spent 40 years killing prey that tried to run, found themselves drifting in dark, having been caught by the one thing they had never planned for, which was prey that did not run at all. "You keep doing the same things," Hale said, and there was no cruelty in it now, only a kind of tired patience, the patience of a teacher who has explained the lesson many times. "Every move you have got, I watched you use on a freighter at some point in the last 6 days. I wrote them all down. There is nothing left in your book I have not already read. That is the thing about hunting the same way for 200 years. You get very good at it, and you stop being able to do anything else. And then one day something comes along that read the whole book before it ever showed up, and you have got nothing. You have got the same 11 moves, and I have got all 11 answers, and that is the whole battle. That has been the whole battle from the first bolt. 9 ships, then 7, then 5. The old wolf worked through them without hurry and without anger, and the green light of Marek filled with the dark shapes of crippled hulls, and on every one of them, a crew sat alive and helpless, and understood, finally and completely, that they had never been hunters at all, that the word had been a costume, that the dark had always had something in it that could do this, and had simply been waiting, patient as stone, for a reason to come out. Resh, alive on her dead ship, found that she had stopped thinking of the human as an enemy, and started thinking of it as a kind of weather. You did not hate a storm. You did not plan against it, not really, because it did not care about your plans. You simply learned, too late, that you had built your whole life in the path of it. The Skull Reach had built 200 years in the path of this, and had called the path safety, because nothing had ever come down it before, and now the thing that had been at the far end of the path the whole time was walking toward them, taking its time, and there was nowhere to build that was not in its way. She thought of the freighter crews the pack had taken. She had watched some of them die, over the years, from this same chair, and she had felt nothing, because feeling nothing was the first thing the Reach taught you. Now she sat in the dark and felt, for the first time, exactly what those crews had felt. The slow certainty that the thing coming for you could not be reasoned with, or fought, or fled, that it would arrive when it chose, that your only remaining choice was the manner of your waiting. She did not say this on the channel. There was no one on the channel who would have understood it yet, but she logged it, quietly, in the part of the record only she would ever read, because she had begun to suspect that she was going to live, and that living was going to mean carrying this, and she wanted it written down before the carrying began. 5 ships, then 4. The captain of the cutter Great Maw, an old hunter named Sorrel who had taught half the pack to fly, brought his ship around in a tight, proud arc and charged the old wolf head-on, guns full, the way the Reach had charged 1,000 cornered things, the only honest move left to a hunter who had decided he would rather close the distance than wait in it. The old wolf held its place and let the Great Maw come, and at the last instant, it slid aside by exactly the width it needed and no more. And as the cutter roared past, it took the drive with a single bolt, gentle, almost respectful, and let the old teacher live. Resh heard Sorrel laugh on the wide channel as his ship went dark. A real laugh, the first true laugh she had heard since the battle began, and she understood it. He had finally met the thing the Reach had always believed could not exist, and some part of the old hunter was glad, The way you are glad to learn that the world is larger and stranger than you thought, even if learning it is the last thing you do as a hunter. The old wolf turned, unhurried, toward the 11 ships that still held formation around the tooth. And it began, very calmly, to take them apart, the way it had taken apart all the others, one careful shot at a time. An old craftsman, finishing a job he had started long before the pack ever knew it had begun. 4 ships now, and then the tooth alone, and the human moving toward it with the unhurried certainty of a thing that had never once, in all its long life, arrived too late to settle what it was owed. Resh kept her station on the dead Grey Fang, because there was nowhere else to go. The cutter drifted without engines, her crew alive and useless, and from the dark hull, Resh watched the old wolf work, and she began, against everything she had been taught, to admire it. It never hurried, that was the thing. 41 ships, and the human fighter moved with the calm of a craftsman who knew the job would be finished, because the job was always finished. It would slide up beside one of the last hunters, place a single bolt through the drive, and move on before the crippled ship had finished spinning. It did not waste a shot. It did not take a risk it did not need. In 6 days of silent hunting, it had learned the pack's every habit, every blind spot in their sensor coverage, every captain's particular flinch, and now it spent that knowledge like a rich man spends small coins, carelessly, because there was so much more where it came from. 4 ships left around the tooth, then 3, then 2. Resh found herself studying the human's technique the way she had once studied the pack's veteran hunters, back when she still believed the pack was the most dangerous thing in the dark. The old wolf did not fight the way a cornered animal fights, all teeth and panic. It did not fight the way the pack fought, with overwhelming force and the comfort of numbers. It fought the way a surgeon cuts, knowing exactly where each line had to fall, taking no more than the job required and no less. Every ship it disabled was disabled in precisely the same way, the engines or the guns, and nothing else. The crews left whole, and that sameness was its own kind of message. It was telling the pack that none of this was difficult. It was telling them that it could do this all day, that it had in fact already done it in its head, that the actual shooting was an afterthought to a decision made 6 days ago in the dark. "Packmaster," Resh said over the command channel, knowing it might be the last thing she ever said to him. "I have a count. He has disabled 39 of our ships and destroyed none. 12 fled. We are 2, and then you. There were 41. He is 1 craft, 40 meters, 1,900 tons, and he has not taken a scratch we can read." She paused, and made herself say the rest, because she had decided that someone in the Skull Reach should say it before the end. "We were never the hunters here. Not today. Not for the last 6 days. I want one of us to have said it out loud before it stops mattering, whether anyone says it at all." "Be quiet," Gornak said. But this time he did not mean it as a command. He meant it as a plea, the plea of a creature who did not want to hear the truth out loud, because hearing it out loud would make it real, and if it was real, then everything he was, everything the Skull Reach was, 200 years of teeth in the dark, had been a small thing that a single tired old human had stepped on without breaking stride. He was a packmaster who had never in his life asked anyone for anything. Resh heard him, now, asking. It was the most frightened sound she had ever heard him make, and he was making it not at the human's guns, but at the human's mercy. The old wolf disabled the last 2 ships in the space of a single breath, 1 bolt each, and turned, at last, toward the tooth of the long dark. It came slowly now. It had hurried through the others, but it did not hurry now, and Resh understood that this was the part the human had waited 6 days for. The little iron fighter crossed the green-lit space between the dead and the doomed blunt nose toward the flagship, 6 weapon emplacements open and patient, and it stopped a few kilometers off the tooth's bow and simply hung there, looking at the bigger ship the way a wolf looks at a thing it has already decided about, with no hurry and no hate, only the flat certainty of an outcome already chosen. "You're the one who gave the orders," Hale said. 9 days, 4 freighters, a fuel tender, and the crews. I read the names. I read all the names. There was a tender called the Marigold, ran medicine out to the mining colonies on the Reach edge. You took her on the 3rd day. You let your hunters use her crew for sport because you were bored and the next freighter wasn't due for 2 days. I read the log you didn't know we recovered. I read what your hunters said while they did it. So before we finish this, I want you to know that I know. and that the knowing is the reason I'm here, and the reason it's me, and not a fleet. This isn't a battle. This was never a battle. This is the bill. Vornak found, somewhere, the last of his old self. You speak of a few hundred lives, he said. We have hunted these stars for 200 years. We have killed more than you could count. You think one old human, in one old fighter, is the answer to all of it? You think you can balance 2 centuries of the hunt with 1 afternoon's work? No, Hale said. I think I'm the answer to 9 days of it. The rest of your 200 years is somebody else's bill, and Earth's got somebody else out collecting it, somewhere you'll never see. That's the part you never understood about us. We don't send a fleet. We send the one who's owed. There were 600 of us who came out of retirement when the lane went quiet. 600 old ships, 600 old crews. They sent me here because I asked first. The others are out in the dark right now, finding the rest of you, 1 pack at a time, and none of them are in any of your archives either, and none of them are in a hurry. You spent 200 years building a ledger of everything you'd taken. You never once thought the other side might be keeping one too. Resh felt the cold close all the way over her. She had thought, in some small corner of herself, that the old wolf was a freak, a single impossible thing, a story that would end here and never be repeated, a nightmare that would not survive the daylight. The human was telling her it was not. The human was telling her there were 600 of them, 640-meter ships, that did not appear in any catalog, crewed by retired humans who had asked, please, to be the ones sent to settle the account. It was not a fleet. A fleet could be counted, ranked, planned against, met with enough ships of your own. This was something worse. This was a debt, walking the dark on 600 quiet pairs of legs, and the Skull Reach had spent 200 years building up the principal without ever knowing there was interest. And now the interest had come due all at once, in the green light of a giant, 1 quiet bolt at a time. You are bluffing, Vornak said. 600. There are not 600 ships like that. There cannot be. We would have seen them. We would have heard. 200 years of hunting, and not one whisper of such a thing. You scanned the old wolf yourself, Hale said. Your sensor officer did. Resh, isn't it? She read the mass and couldn't make it fit. She read the armor, and the number ran off the end of her scale. She tried to read my guns and got nothing back, because there's nothing in your instruments built to look at them. 1 ship did that to her readouts, Packmaster. Now picture 600. Picture what your 200 years of records are worth against 600 ships that don't appear in a single one of them. You spent 2 centuries learning everything that could be learned about hunting the stars. We spent the same 2 centuries making sure the one thing that could end you was the one thing you'd never see coming. That's not a bluff. That's just patience. You should have learned to fear patience. It's the only thing out here that always wins. Resh did not answer. She did not need to. Her silence answered for her, and Vornak heard it, and the last of his certainty went out like a snuffed light. She had read the human's ship with her own instruments. She knew, better than the Packmaster ever could, that nothing about the old wolf made sense, and that a thing which made no sense in 1 body would make no more sense in 600, and that the not making sense was precisely the weapon. You cannot plan against a thing your instruments refuse to measure. You can only wait for it to come, and hope it is not your name on the list. For 6 days the Packmaster had been a hunter waiting for unworthy prey. Now he understood that he had been a name on a list the whole time, one of 41 names, and that his name had simply come up. The human had not chosen the Tooth because it was the strongest ship, or the most dangerous. The human had chosen the Tooth because Vornak had given the orders that killed the Marigold's crew, and Earth, in its terrible patience, kept a list, and put a name beside each crime, and then waited, for years if it had to, until the right old ship and the right old pilot asked to be the one to cross the name off. It was the most personal thing that had ever happened to him, and it had been decided without his knowing he was even in the room. The Marigold, Vornak said slowly, you came all this way, for a medicine tender. I came all this way for the people on it, Hale said. There's a difference, and the fact that you can't hear it is the whole reason you're about to be a story instead of a hunter. You took 40 years of pack and ground it down to 1 ship in 26 minutes, watching me do it, and you still think this is about tonnage. It was never about tonnage, son. It was about the bill. It's always about the bill. That's the part the galaxy keeps forgetting, and that's the part we keep coming back to remind them. one quiet ship, and one long list at a time. The old wolf drifted a little closer to the tooth, 6 emplacements turning, settling, locking. Resh watched the targeting wash across the flagship's hull, and knew there was nothing the tooth could do. No armor thick enough, no speed fast enough, no trick old enough. The pack had been 41 ships and a 2-century reputation, and the smug certainty of the apex predator, and it had been reduced, in less than half an hour, to one frightened captain, on one doomed flagship, surrounded by the dark and crippled hulls of his own pack. Every one of them watching, every one of them spared, so that they would have to watch. "Last chance," Hale said. "I meant the deal. Turn around. Give up the lane. Live. I'd rather you lived hating me than died not learning anything. That's not mercy. I'm too old for mercy. It's just that a story told by a survivor travels farther than a story told about a corpse, and I want this one to travel. I want it to reach every pack between here and the core. I want it to be the thing your young ones hear before they ever decide a supply lane looks like easy meat. You can be that story, alive, or I can make it about you, dead. Either way it gets told. Only one way do you get to see how it lands." And for one long moment, Resh thought the packmaster might take it. She thought she saw, in the set of his broad shoulders on the bridge feed, the beginning of the turn. Live old in a warm bed, tell the people the lane belonged to Earth, carry the story, be the survivor instead of the trophy. Then Vornak did the thing that hunters do, the thing that is in them deeper than thought, the thing that 200 years had made the truest part of him. He could not bear to be the one who survived because the prey allowed it. He would rather be a corpse than a coward. He would rather die a hunter than live as a man who had been spared, who had to thank, every morning for the rest of his life, the thing that had decided he was not worth killing. Resh watched the tooth's gun ports open all along its flank, 68 of them, and she did a thing she had not done in 20 years of service. She prayed, not for the packmaster, not for the tooth. She prayed, quietly, in the language her grandmother had used, that whatever the old wolf was, it would remember the difference it kept drawing between the crews and the ships, and that the difference would hold for one more minute, and that the helpless thing she had become would be allowed to stay helpless and alive, instead of becoming a lesson the human decided he needed after all. She had spent her whole life believing the pack stood at the top of the dark, that the only question in any encounter was how the prey would die, and now she understood that there had been a second question all along, hidden underneath the first, and that the second question was the only one that had ever mattered. The question was not whether you could win, the question was whether you were on the list. The Skull Reach had never asked it, because the Skull Reach had never imagined a list existed. They had been so certain they were the ones keeping count that it had never occurred to them they might be a line in someone else's ledger, a name with a date beside it, waiting for the right old ship to come and draw the line through. "Packmaster," she tried, one last time, because she could not help it, because some part of her, that was not yet wholly a hunter, wanted him to live. "He means it. He will let you live. I have watched him for half an hour, and he has not broken a single word he gave. Turn the ship. Please, let me carry a story about a captain who chose to live. Do not make me carry one about a captain who chose this." For a heartbeat she thought it had worked. The tooth's gun ports paused in their opening. The bridge feed showed Vornak standing very still, 200 years of pride at war, in the space behind his eyes, with the simple animal wish to keep breathing. Resh held her own breath. The whole dark seemed to hold it with her, the crippled hulls and the fleeing traces, and the patient iron fighter, all of them waiting to see which way the oldest hunter in the Reach would fall. Then his shoulders set, and she knew, and her heart went cold, because she had seen that set 100 times across 100 hunts, on the prey that decided, at the very end, that it would rather die facing the thing than die running from it. She had admired it, in prey, once. She had thought it noble. She understood now that it was only ever the last and proudest mistake a cornered thing could make, and that she was about to watch the packmaster make it, and that there was nothing she, or the human, or 200 years of the Reach could do to stop him. "Fire everything," he said, at the old wolf, and the tooth of the long dark brought all its guns to bear on the little iron fighter. One last hunt, doomed and proud, the only kind of ending a skull packmaster could choose. Hale sighed over the open channel. And it was a real sigh, tired and almost sad, the sigh of a man who had hoped, against all his own experience, for the other answer. "All right," he said. "Have it your way. For the record, Resh, and for everyone who ran today and is still listening, I offered. You all heard me offer. Remember that part too, when you tell it. The part where he could have lived." Then the old wolf moved, and the long dark began to close around the tooth. The tooth of the long dark carried 68 guns, and it fired all 68 at once. Resh watched the green sky around the old wolf turn white. For an instant, the little fighter vanished inside the light of more firepower than the skull reach had ever brought against a single target. 68 beams converged on one point in space, the point where the iron fighter had been, and the point burned with a heat that washed across the dead gray fang and made Resh's instruments scream and her hull groan. It was, she thought, the single most powerful thing she had ever seen the pack do. 200 years of hunting had built toward moments like this one. The whole pride and weight of the skull reach poured into one blinding instant. When the light cleared, the old wolf was gone. For one breath, Resh felt the smallest, most shameful flicker of hope. Perhaps the packmaster had been right. Perhaps even an impossible ship could be drowned in enough fire. Perhaps 200 years of hunting still counted for something, and the story would end with the tooth standing alone and proud over the wreck of the thing that had come for it, and the list, whatever it was, would have one fewer collector on it tonight. Then her rear sensors lit, the same way they had at the very beginning, and she understood that the human had simply done again what it had done the first time, the trick the whole pack had watched and somehow still not learned. It had not been there when the guns fired. It had been somewhere else, 11,000 kilometers off, with no streak of light between, and now it hung off the tooth's stern, 40 meters of patched iron, against the flank of a ship 200 times its size, and its 6 emplacements were open, and aimed, and very, very patient. The packmaster had fired the greatest broadside in the history of the Reach at a place the human had already left, and the human had been waiting, all along, behind him. "You fired 68 guns at where I used to be," Hale said. "That's the whole story of your species, packmaster. You're always aiming at where the dangerous thing used to be. You took the marigold because she was where the medicine used to be, and never thought about who the medicine was for. You hunted this lane for 9 days aiming at freighters, never once at the thing that would come for the freighters. Now you've fired your whole arsenal at a ghost. Watch. This is what aiming at the right place looks like." The first bolt went through the tooth's main reactor, not into it, through it. The flagship's engines died, and its lights flickered to the dull red of emergency power, and the great hull went from a hunting ship to a drifting one in the space of a single shot. Resh felt the change, even from her own dead vessel, the way you feel a large animal stop breathing, the sudden absence of a thing that had filled the dark with its presence a moment before. The second bolt went through the gun decks, the long lateral batteries that held the tooth's 68 guns, and Resh watched the firing capacity drain off her board, section by section, as the bolt walked the length of the ship and left every battery cold. The tooth had thrown its whole arsenal at the old wolf, and the old wolf had let it, had stood in the place where the fire would fall, and then quietly stepped out of it, and now it took that arsenal away with one shot, the way an adult takes a stick from a child who has decided to swing it. 68 guns, dark, in a single line drawn down the spine of the ship. The third bolt, and the fourth, and the fifth, went through the maneuvering thrusters, fore and aft and lateral, so that the tooth could not turn, could not run, could not so much as point its blunt prow at the thing that was killing it. The flagship hung in the green light, blind and dark and disarmed, exactly as helpless as the marigold had been on the third day, and Resh did not think the symmetry was an accident. The human did nothing by accident. The human had a list, and a bill, and a long memory, and it was paying out the tooth's last minutes in the same coin the tooth had spent on a medicine tender 9 days before. Helpless, drifting, alive enough to understand, the human was making the packmaster feel, in his last minutes, exactly what he had made 51 others feel. On the tooth's bridge, in the dull red of emergency light, the packmaster Vornak stood among consoles that no longer answered him, and watched the human's fighter through the forward port. 40 meters of patched iron, that had unmade his flagship in 5 quiet shots. For 200 years he had given orders, and the dark had obeyed. He gave one now, out of habit, the order to fire, and nothing happened, because there was nothing left to fire, and the silence that answered him was the loudest thing he had ever heard. Resh, listening on the open channel, heard him give the order twice more, smaller each time, and heard the bridge crew around him say nothing, because there was nothing to say, and she understood that the packmaster was learning, in his last minutes, the precise weight of a word that no one obeys. It was the weight the freighter captains had carried. It was the weight he had spent his whole life putting on others. Now it was his, all of it, delivered in a single afternoon. You could have stayed a hunter in the stories, Hale said, almost kindly. If you had turned around, hunters who quit get to be remembered as dangerous. It is the ones who stand in the open with no guns left and keep giving orders nobody follows that get remembered as something else. You are writing that part yourself, right now, and I cannot stop you, and I would not if I could, because the difference between us is I let people choose their ending, and you never once did. Vornak did not answer. Resh thought, listening, that he had finally run out of pride to spend, and that what was left underneath it was just an old creature in a dying ship who had never, in all his long life, imagined a night like this one could exist. The other crippled ships of the Reach listened too, the whole shattered pack hanging dark in the green light, and not one of them spoke. And the silence among them was not the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of understanding. They had all, finally, understood the same thing at the same time, and the thing they understood was that they had never been the most dangerous thing in the dark, and that the most dangerous thing had simply chosen, for 200 years, not to come down their lane, and had come now, only because a tender called the Marigold had given it a reason. Resh, Hale said, and she startled, because she had not expected to be spoken to directly in the middle of it. You're on the Greyfang, you're alive, your crew's alive. I left you that way on purpose. You're the one who kept count when nobody wanted to hear it. You're the one who said it out loud, that you were never the hunters. You're going to be the one who carries this home. Why me? She said. It came out smaller than she meant it to. Because you understood, the human said. Most of them won't, even now. Most of them will tell it as bad luck, a freak, a single impossible ship, a story they can put down and forget. You know better. You read my mass and my armor and my guns, and you knew there was something underneath that your whole archive couldn't hold, and you didn't lie to yourself about it, even when lying would have been easier. So you're going to tell it true. You're going to tell the Reach, and the next Reach, and every pack that ever thought a supply lane was easy meat, that Earth keeps a list, that we don't send a fleet, we send the one who's owed, that there's no number of ships big enough, and no 200 years of hunting good enough, because the thing that comes for you isn't in any of your records, and never will be. Will you do that? Not for me. For the 51. So they're not just a number in a log nobody reads. Resh looked at the tooth, dark and dying in the green glow, and at the field of crippled hulls around it, and at the 12 faint engine traces of the ships that had run, already far out toward the safety of the dark. She thought of 200 years of catalogs that did not have the old wolf in them. She thought of 600 more old ships out in the black, settling old accounts, none of them in a hurry. She thought of the kind of fear that does not come from a thing you can see, but from a thing you cannot. The patient thing. The thing that keeps count. I'll do it, she said. Good, said Hale. Then you should look away now. This part's for him, not for you. You don't owe it to anybody to watch. But Resh did not look away. She had decided, somewhere in the last half hour, that she owed it to the 51 to watch the bill paid, that turning away would be a small cowardice in a day that had already shown her every large one. So she watched, and as she watched, she found that the watching had changed her in a way she could not undo. An hour ago she had been a hunter who logged losses and said nothing. Now she was something else, something the day had made, a witness, the one who would carry it, and she understood that the human had made her into this on purpose, the same way he had made the whole pack into an audience, because a debt this old needed more than a corpse to settle it. It needed someone left alive who had finally learned to read the ledger from the other side. Resh was that someone now, made by an afternoon she had not asked for. She felt the shape of the rest of her life settle onto her shoulders, all the tellings ahead of her. All the packs who would hear it and not believe it until they too were a name on a list they did not know existed. She did not set the weight down. She had a feeling she never would. The old wolf drifted around the dying flagship until it hung off the bow, nose to nose with the tooth of the long dark, the way a hunter faces the thing it has run to ground. On the open channel, every surviving captain of the Skull Reach listened, the crippled ones in the field, and the fleeing ones in the dark, and Resh knew the human wanted it that way. He had spent 6 days arranging this audience. He would not waste it on a quiet ending. Packmaster Vornak, Hale said, and his dry voice had gone formal now, almost gentle, the voice of a man reading a sentence he had carried a long way, and meant to read correctly. On the 3rd day of your raid on the Skull Lane, you took the medicine tender Marigold and her crew of 51, and you killed them for sport, because you were bored, and the next freighter was 2 days out. Their names are aboard the Old Wolf. I have read every one of them, out loud, on the way here, so that I'd be saying this for them, and not just at you. You have hunted these stars for 200 years, and you have never once been hunted, and you decided, when I offered you your life, that you would rather die a predator than live a man. I am going to give you what you chose, not because I hate you. I'm too tired to hate you, because somebody has to be the bill, and today, for you, it's me. You are nothing, Vornak said, and even now, even dark and disarmed and doomed, there was a terrible pride in it, the pride that had been the truest thing in him all along. One ship, one man. The Skull Reach will hunt these stars long after you are dust. You cannot end us. You are too small. No, Hale said. It won't. That's the part you still don't believe, and you'll believe it for about 90 seconds, which is all the time either of us has left for it. The 12 ships that ran today believe it. And Resh believes it. And by the time she's finished telling it, every pack from here to the core will believe it. You spent 200 years making the Skull Reach a thing the galaxy was afraid of. I'm about to spend 90 seconds making it a thing the galaxy warns its children about. There's a difference between those two things. One of them is power, the other one is a grave. You're about to feel which is which. The Old Wolf's 6 emplacements settled, all 6, on the Bridge of the Tooth, where the Packmaster stood. For the Marigold, Hale said, for all 51, good night, Packmaster. What happened next, Resh did not look away from, because she had decided she owed it to the 51 to watch the bill paid. The Old Wolf did not fire all 6 at once. It fired them one at a time, slow, 90 seconds end to end, the way the human had promised, each bolt taking a piece of the tooth and leaving the bridge for last. It was not cruelty. Resh, watching, understood that it was the opposite of cruelty. It was care. The human was making sure there was nothing left of the Skull Reach's flagship that could ever hunt again, and he was doing it in the open, on the channel, in front of everyone, so that the lesson would be complete and would never have to be taught a second time to anyone who heard it the first. Resh found that she was counting again, the way she had counted the missing Outriders 6 days ago. Only now she was counting the seconds the humans spent on each shot, and the spaces of quiet between them, and she realized that the rhythm was deliberate, that the human was giving the Packmaster exactly enough time between each bolt to understand what the last one had taken, and to dread the next. It was a terrible kindness, if it was a kindness at all. It was the rhythm of a thing that had decided the lesson mattered more than the speed, that a death too quick to be understood was a death wasted, and that the Marigold's 51 deserved to have their bill paid slowly enough that the whole dark could read it. The last bolt went through the bridge of the Tooth of the Long Dark, and the Packmaster Vornak, who had hunted the stars for 200 years and had never once imagined that the stars might hunt back, was gone, and the great flagship broke slowly into the green light of the giant Merrick, and the Long Dark closed over it the way the human had said it would. For a long moment after the tooth broke apart, no one in the whole shattered pack said anything. The crippled hulls drifted in the green light, with their dead engines and their living crews, and the fleeing ships ran on into the dark, and the wreck of the flagship spread slowly across the face of the giant. Resh understood that she was looking at the shape of every story she would tell for the rest of her life. One ship, 40 meters, patched and scorched and impossible, hanging quiet over the ruin of the thing that had laughed at it, having paid a bill the laughers never knew they owed. Then there was silence on the channel. The Old Wolf hung in the wreckage, 40 meters of patched and scorched iron, 6 emplacements cooling, blunt nose turning slowly toward the dark, and for a long moment it did not move, the way a man stands still for a moment over a thing he has finished, before he picks up his tools and goes home. And in the quiet, Resh began, already, to choose the words. "It's done," Hale said at last, quietly, and Resh did not think he was speaking to her, or to the pack, or to anyone living. 51. Crossed off. Sleep, you lot. I'm coming home. The old wolf came back to Resh's dead ship before it left. She had not expected that. She had expected the little fighter to turn its blunt nose at the dark and burn for home the way it had said, leaving her crippled in the green glow with the wreckage and the names. Instead, the iron craft crossed the field of dead hulls one more time and stopped off the Grey Fang's bow, close enough that Resh, at her station, could see again the scorch mark down one wing and the unpainted panel near the cockpit that sat against the rest of the hull like a bruise. Up close, knowing now what it was, the damage did not look like neglect. It looked like a record. Every scar was a place the old wolf had been and come back from. The unpainted panel was not laziness. It was a tally that the pilot had simply stopped bothering to hide. A mark left where some old wound had been closed, and the closing had mattered more than the paint. "I'm towing the Grey Fang to the edge of the system," Hale said. "Your engines are gone, but your life support's good for a month. There's a fuel depot the colonies run, 11 hours drift from where I'll leave you. They'll find you. They'll be surprised to find a Skull crew alive. You'll have to explain that." I'd start practicing. "You are letting us go," Resh said. "All of us. The whole crew of the Grey Fang, after everything we did to that lane." "I'm letting 29 ships worth of you go," Hale said. "Crippled, not dead. I told you at the start, I wasn't here for 41 ships. I was here for the one. Everybody else was always going home. Some of you just took longer to believe it than others. You especially. You spent the whole battle waiting for me to come for you. And the truth is, I never even thought about it. You weren't on the list. Vornak was. That's all there ever was to it." A grapple line reached out from the old wolf, thin and steady, and made fast to the Grey Fang's bow, and the little fighter began, gently, to tow the dead cutter out toward the dark, 1,900 tons of impossible iron, pulling a ship 100 times its size, as easily as a man pulls a cart. Resh watched the green giant Merrick shrink behind them, and thought about all the things she would have to say when she got home, and about how few of them anyone would believe, and about how that did not matter, because the 12 ships that had run had heard it too, and the story would arrive from a dozen mouths at once, and there would be no denying it. "Why did you really do it this way?" she asked. She did not know if he would answer. "You could have run the lane in an hour. You could have killed the tooth in the dark, the way you took the Outriders. Instead, you waited 6 days. You gathered the whole pack. You made everyone watch. Why go to all that trouble for one ship's worth of justice?" For a while, the human did not answer, and the only sound was the soft hiss of the deep and the faint creak of the grapple line under load. "Because the killing's the easy part," Hale said finally. "Any old ship can kill. The old wolf's been killing since before your grandmother's grandmother hunted her first lane. If I just wanted the tooth dead, it'd have been dead on the second day, and nobody would have learned a thing. But the galaxy doesn't learn from a quiet kill in the dark. It tells itself the ship had bad engines. It tells itself the captain was unlucky. It goes right on thinking the supply lanes are easy meat, and the humans are slow, soft things that came alone in junk fighters." He paused. "So you don't kill quiet. You make it slow, and you make it public, and you let the ones who run carry it home. Because a hunt the galaxy watches is a hunt the galaxy remembers, and a hunt the galaxy remembers is a hunt nobody has to fight twice. I spent 6 days buying 100 years of quiet on this lane. That's a good trade. That's the only trade worth coming out of retirement for." Resh thought about that for a long time. She thought about 200 years of the Skull Reach being the most feared thing in this stretch of the dark, and about how that fear had been worth nothing in the end, because it had been built on the belief that there was nothing in the galaxy patient enough, or cold enough, or quiet enough, to come and collect. The humans had not been bigger. They had not brought a fleet. They had brought one tired old man, in one tired old ship, and they had brought a list, and they had brought the willingness to wait 6 days to make a point. And that had been enough. That had been more than enough. The Skull Reach had spent 2 centuries being a predator, and it had never once understood that the most dangerous thing in the dark is not the thing with the most teeth. It is the thing that keeps count, and does not forget, and is willing to come a very long way, very patiently, to settle what it is owed. "You said there are 600, she said. 600 ships like this one. Was that true? Or was that for the Packmaster? Does it matter?" Hale said. "If it's true, then your people are in more trouble than they can imagine. If it's a bluff, then one ship did all this, today, in front of you. And you have to ask yourself how much worse the truth would have to be to need a bluff. Either way, the lesson's the same. Either way, you tell it the same. That's the thing about a number like 600. You don't need it to be real. You only need them to be unable to prove it isn't. And they can't. Because we're not in their archives. And we never will be." A pause. "But for what it's worth, Resh, since you kept count when nobody else would, it's true. There are more than 600. I just gave you the small number, because the real one would have made the Packmaster run, and the Packmaster wasn't allowed to run. He was on the list. At the edge of the system, where the green of Marek had faded to a far point of light, the old wolf began to slow, and Resh knew the tow was ending. "This is where I leave you," Hale said. 11 hours drift, that way. You'll make it. When you tell it, Resh, tell it true. Don't make me a monster. I'm not. I'm just the bill, and the bill always comes. And the only thing your whole pack ever got wrong was thinking it wouldn't. Thinking the dark was empty behind them. Thinking the freighters had no one who'd come. What do I call you?" she said. "In the telling. What do I call the ship, so they know it when it comes for them?" "You already know," he said. "You've known since the first day, when 3 of your outriders went quiet, and nobody else would say why. Call it the Old Wolf. Tell them it's still out there. Tell them there are more like it than they can count. Tell them none of it is in your archives, and none of it ever will be. And tell them the only way to stay off the list is to never, ever, get put on it." A pause. And then, dry and almost warm, the closest the human had come to kindness all day. "And tell them one came alone, in junk. And that was the part that should have frightened them most of all. We only send one. We only ever need one. A species that has to send a fleet is a species that isn't sure it'll win. We're always sure." The grapple line came loose with a soft jolt, and the gray fang drifted on alone toward the distant depot, and the old wolf hung for a moment in the dark. An old craft and an old man at the edge of a system full of the day's work. "Last thing," Hale said. "The 51, the Marigold's crew. They had names. I'm going to read them to you. Once. And then you're going to carry them too. Because a name carried by an enemy travels farther than a name carved on a stone. And these ones deserve the distance. Will you carry them?" "I will," Resh said. And she meant it. And she did not fully understand why, except that the human had spent a whole day teaching her, without once saying so, that there is a difference between a hunter and a thing that settles a debt. And she had decided she would rather be the second. So the human read her the names, all 51, slowly, in the dark. And Resh wrote each one down at her dead station. And when he was finished, there was a silence that was not empty. And then the old wolf turned its blunt nose toward the deep. Its 3 dark thruster ports stayed dark, and the 5 that still worked lit a soft and patient blue, and the little iron fighter slid away into the long dark without a streak of light to mark its going. Exactly the way it had moved all day, there and then, not there. Gone before the eye could follow, an impossible weight moving like a thrown knife, a thing the instruments had never been built to measure leaving the way it had come. The 11 hours of drift were the longest of Resh's life, and she spent them at the silent console with the wide channel open, listening to the Skull Reach learn what had happened to it. The fleeing ships were talking now. They had run far enough to feel safe, and safety had loosened their tongues. And across the dark, the survivors traded the same impossible account in a dozen frightened voices. 41 ships, 1 fighter, 29 crippled, 12 fled, the flagship broken over the giant, and the Packmaster gone, and not one human killed, because there had only ever been one human, and he had not been touched. Resh listened to captains who had spent their whole lives certain of their place at the top of the dark, try to fit the afternoon into words, and fail, and try again. And she understood that the failing was the point. The human had built a thing that could not be told cleanly. only repeated in pieces, each piece more frightening than the last, until the whole of it sat in the listener like a stone. A clean story can be argued with. A story that breaks every time you try to tell it cannot. It just spreads. On the cutter Nightclaw, the captain named Drask, the first to run, came on the wide channel and said the thing none of the others had dared to say. "We were never hunters," Drask said, his voice flat with the calm that comes after the worst fear has burned out. "Not today, not ever, maybe. We told ourselves we were the dangerous thing in the dark because nothing dangerous ever came down our lane, and the reason nothing dangerous ever came was that we had never yet done the one thing that brings it. We did it on the third day, to a tender called the Marigold, and it came. That is all that happened here. We finally did the thing that makes the dark answer, and the dark answered, and it only needed one." No one argued with him. Resh, listening, thought that Drask had become, in his way, what the human had made her, a teller, one who had finally learned to read the ledger from the other side. There would be more of them. Every ship that had fled would carry a piece of it home, and the pieces would find each other, and somewhere in the joining the skull reach, would stop being a pack of hunters who had lost a battle, and become, instead, the cautionary tale the human had spent 6 days building it into. Resh had watched a reputation 2 centuries in the making get spent in half an hour, and now she watched a different reputation get built out of the spending, and the new one would last far longer than the old, because fear of a thing that hunts you is small and brief, but fear of a thing that keeps count, and comes when it chooses, never goes away at all. The colony depot found the Grey Fang in the 9th hour, 2 hours ahead of the human's estimate, a small worn station of mining families who had run the medicine tender Marigold and 4 freighters into the reach, and had spent 9 days mourning their dead. When their tug crews boarded the crippled cutter and found a living skull crew, there was a long and dangerous silence, the silence of grieving people standing over the kind that had done the grieving to them. Resh did the only thing she could think to do. She gave them the log. She gave them the names, all 51, read in a human's voice and written in a hunter's hand, and she told them what the human had told her to tell, the whole of it, the mass that would not fit, and the guns that gave nothing back, and the 6 days of patient silence, and the bill paid slow over the giant. She told them the human had spared her so that she could tell them, and that she would tell anyone, for the rest of her life, because she had been made into a teller, and she did not intend to waste it. The mining families listened. They did not forgive her, and she did not ask them to. But when she had finished, an old woman of the depot, who had lost a granddaughter on the Marigold, looked at the skull sensor officer for a long time, and then said, "He read their names, the human. He read all 51 before he did it." And when Resh said that he had, the old woman closed her eyes, and something in her face eased, just slightly, the way grief eases when it learns it has been witnessed by someone who did not have to bother and bothered anyway. That was the moment Resh understood the last thing the human had been teaching her, the thing he had never said, because it could only be learned and not told. The bill was not for the packmaster. The packmaster was only where the bill got paid. The bill was for the 51, and for the old woman with her eyes closed, and for everyone the dark had ever taken from people who had no fleet to send, and no way to answer. The human had crossed half a galaxy, and waited 6 days, and spent one long afternoon, not to punish a hunter, but to tell a grieving family, in the only language the dark understands, that their dead had been counted, that someone had kept the list, and that the universe was not as empty of answers as it had seemed on the 3rd day when the Marigold went silent. Resh sat at her dead station on her dead ship and watched the place where it had been, and then she opened a log, and she began to write it down, every detail, the mass that would not fit, and the armor that ran off the scale, and the guns that gave nothing back, the 6 days of silence, and the 12 ships that ran, and the 90 seconds the human had spent on the tooth, so that the lesson would never have to be taught again. She wrote the name of the medicine tender, the Marigold, and she wrote the number, 51, and beneath it, she wrote all 51 names, the way she had promised, and beside them, she wrote the only thing the Skull Reach had learned in 200 years that was worth keeping. The galaxy mocked the one small fighter, she wrote, because it came alone, in junk, and would not give its name, and the galaxy was right to be afraid of exactly that, and far too late to learn why. They had counted 41 ships against one, and they had been wrong about the count from the first day. It had always been 1 against 1. It had always been the packmaster against the Bill, and the Bill, when it finally came for him, had not even bothered to bring a second ship because it had never once doubted that one would be enough. She stayed at the depot for 3 days, while the colony's engineers worked out what to do with a skull crew that no one wanted to kill and no one wanted to keep. In those 3 days, the story reached the next system, and the one after, carried on the wide channels by the 12 ships that had fled, and by every relay the colonies owned, and it changed as it traveled, the way all true things change, growing simpler and harder and more exact. By the 3rd day it had reached a shape that would not change again. 1 human, 1 old fighter, 41 ships of the Skull Reach, and a tender called the Marigold, and a bill that came for the one who signed it, and let everyone else go home to tell. Other skull packs heard it. Resh knew they had, because the raids stopped, not slowed, stopped. Across the whole reach, in the space of a single week, the hunters who had treated the human supply lanes as easy meat for 200 years simply turned their noses away from them, all at once, without an order, without a treaty, without a single further shot fired. They had done the arithmetic the human had wanted them to do. They had pictured 1 ship that did not appear in any archive, and then they had pictured 600, and then they had pictured their own names on a list they could not read, and they had decided, every pack at once, that a quiet lane was worth more than a full hold. The human had said he was buying 100 years of quiet. He had bought it in a week, and he had bought it for every lane, not just this one, because a lesson taught well enough does not need to be taught in every classroom. It only needs to be taught once, in the open, slow enough to remember. Far out in the dark, the old wolf burned for home. An old man and an old ship with one more name crossed off a list that the galaxy did not know existed, and would spend the next 100 years pretending it had never heard of, and would never, for a single hour of those 100 years, truly forget. And on the edge of a quiet system, a Skull sensor officer, who had finally learned to be afraid of the right thing, drifted toward a colony depot, with 51 names in her log, and a story in her mouth, and she knew, with the cold and total certainty the human had given her, that she would tell it true, and that wherever it traveled, it would arrive ahead of the next one of those old quiet ships, and that this, in the end, was exactly what the human had crossed half a galaxy and waited 6 days and spent one long afternoon to make sure of.